Have you ever had the strangely specific desire to see Diablo 2 become a roguelite ARPG? Well, if that unusual craving is something you inexplicably possess, then you're the perfect audience for Halls of Torment. Yeah, the developers here aren't exactly being subtle with the name here, since anyone who's ever played any of the Diablo games can tell you all about Blizzard's famous, or rather infamous, difficulty leveling system known as the Torment levels. That said, while clearly the devs are big fans of Blizzard's games, this isn't by any means a ripoff of said games. Halls of Torment definitely is making liberal use of the dark fantasy visual aesthetic and the old school graphics players would definitely be familiar with, but keeping things otherwise at least fairly original. The gameplay formula here is pretty simple. Survive as long as you can against increasingly large and difficult waves of the endless enemy horde. As you run around, you can pick up currency to level up, and by doing so unlock any number of passive buffs. You can unlock a few active abilities too, like this lightning strike ability you'll hopefully see in the background if I've remembered to edit in the right video footage here. Unfortunately, these abilities are all automated. You have no manual control over any of them. I kinda wish I had the ability to manually control them though. It's weird because with the basic melee or range attack you start with, whatever, each playable character having their own specific form of attack, you realize, you can choose in the in-game's option menu to enable auto attack, which is useful because unless you really love spamming left mouse and getting your finger like really fucking tired, it's probably useful to enable that thing. By default you do have to manually click, but that's beside the point. But with the special abilities, it's all automated and there's no way to swap it off. Again, I'm not a fan of that particular inconsistency with auto attack being a thing you can enable or disable when you're talking about the primary attack, but with the special ones, you just leave it up to nature, I guess. I'll live with it. It's not the biggest issue at stake here in the game, but it is something I thought was worth mentioning. The characters are all pretty interesting. You start with a traditional barbarian fighter, and over time you unlock a few others. Personally, my favorite is the guy with the flamethrower, which admittedly is something of a misnomer, because what he shoots out isn't necessarily a continuous tongue of flame, but rather a series of separate flame blasts dealing direct damage upon hit, as well as a chance to burn damage over time. It's basically like playing TF2 Pyro, except only using the Dragon's Breath primary weapon. Burning things is oddly really satisfying in video games. I'm not going to go so far as to endorse pyromania in real life because I'm not a homicidal maniac, but in video games it can definitely be pretty awesome. Probably part of that is this whole power fantasy of being able to do a lot of damage really quickly and really efficiently without it requiring a whole lot of mechanical skill in order to do so. As with any roguelite game, temporary upgrades are not the end-all be-all. You do have a series of permanent upgrades you can spend currency on in between matches via the little camp area you start in when you first load in the game. My problem here is that there aren't many upgrades for you to choose from, only about half a dozen. I understand the theory that obviously the more upgrades a player has equipped at once, taking into account both the temporary and the permanent ones alike, the more risk you are of making the player excessively overpowered, in contrast to whatever it is they're fighting against. So obviously a bit of balancing is required for the good of the game. So go ahead, balance it, I'm not stopping you. But if your idea of balancing is merely limiting the player to just a handful of permanent abilities with insanely low initial costs and only a few consecutive upgrades, then I have to ask, why should I bother putting in hours of additional playtime? There's not all that much to grind for here. I get that the game is only $5 to purchase on Steam, but if you're only going to provide about an hour's worth of content, only about 20 minutes each to play through each of the game's current 3 or so levels, and your upgrades unlock tree is minimal to the point of barely being existent in the first place, you're basically just asking people to refund your game well within Steam's 2-hour refund window, and I have no idea why you'd ever want to do that. The game isn't bad, and I really want to emphasize that. It is not bad. It succeeds at almost everything it sets out to do. Its biggest stumbling block right now, without a doubt, is that there's simply not enough for the player to do. What currently exists as of now is barely more content than I'd expect of a Steam Next Fest demo. I can feel the passion the developers clearly put into this game. I just honestly think they should have held back a bit longer to put more content in before rushing this game out into early access. Oh, also, the limited number of attacks and the ever-increasing hordes of enemies that force you into adapting pretty much one exclusive playstyle, and you never stray from that. That said, playstyle running around in circles again and again and again as the enemies mindlessly follow you. It's not a bad strategy, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be viable, but I do think it's a mistake that this is basically the only way you even have a shot at surviving a level here in Halls of Torment. Then again, there are plenty of games that essentially force the player into only ever playing one specific way to the exclusion of all else. I mean, the Dark Souls series exists, so there's that. And no, to head off some intrepid dumbassery in the comments section below because I dared to be flippant about the god-protected Dark Souls for a microsecond. I am not saying this game is like Dark Souls, I'm just mentioning a game that is well known by the internet for pushing the player into one specific playstyle above all else. Doing this kind of thing does not make your game bad, but it does inherently limit the potential size of your player base. Most players prefer to have some flexibility in how they approach a difficult situation in a game. If you make it all but impossible to play any single way other than the one you explicitly designed the game around, you just risk pissing people off unnecessarily. And hey, I'm not opposed to pissing people off unnecessarily, I've been on Twitter before, but at the same time, I wasn't trying to sell a video game when I was doing that. So to round things up, Halls of Torment is a game with a lot of potential, but very little content. It puts a lot of emphasis on progression, but the progression systems are likewise very limited and don't do much to sustain long-term replayability and retention. Performance-wise, the game runs very smoothly. Its options menu is pretty minimalistic, but you probably won't need to tweak all that much, so it shouldn't really matter. Overall, I am kind of neutral on the game. It's not a clear-cut thumbs up or a thumbs down, which in a lot of cases it usually is. If the game adds a hell of a lot more content and does more to flesh out the progression system, I'd probably be enthusiastically going around to my friends saying, hey, come check out this game. But the game's been in early access for almost a year now, and it doesn't have all that much to say for it. If this is the state the game's in now after 11 months of early access updates, I'd hate to see how the developer tried to justify charging people money for the initial early access release of only 1 or 2 levels. But that's it for me today. I've been semi-retired as far as YouTube goes this past month or 2, or 3 at this point, depending on when the video goes out. I just reached a point where I felt creatively burnt out, and I think that happens to everyone, whether you're a big creator or a small one. I never stopped enjoying playing games, but I just didn't feel the need to review any of them. And I've been focusing on other areas of my life. I've been focusing, for one, on literary publishing, and honestly, I'm having a really good time with that. I've had a bit of success on that front. I don't know what the future holds for my channel. Maybe I'll start doing videos again on the regular, or maybe I'm reaching the end of the road. I really don't know. But I am grateful for those of you that have stuck around, or even if you're new to the channel and you're just checking this video out, I'm grateful. I also hope you take the time to find things you enjoy doing as well. Work is all well and good, but you've got to find some time to do stuff that makes you feel fulfilled too. At any rate, this is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome, and peace out.